During the pandemic, we need Medicare for all more desperately than ever. It's criminal that the Democratic leadership continues to oppose it. Everyone on the left agrees with that. But to understand how the Democratic and Republican establishments can succeed in continuing to block such a basic reform, we need to avoid the dangers of voluntarism, the idea that we can achieve important political results by just wanting them badly enough. It's vitally important that we win this fight, but to do that, we need to start with a realistic understanding of why we're losing. Nancy Pelosi has been re-elected as Speaker of the House. I'd say that it had all the suspense of a Soviet election, but honestly, there was probably more factional wrangling within the Brezhnev-era power structure than at the top levels of the contemporary Democratic Party. Anyone on the left should be able to agree that Nancy Pelosi continuing to exercise any sort of power is a bad thing. But comedian and YouTube host Jimmy Dore has suggested that all of this reflects particularly badly on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that AOC should have taken the leadership vote as an opportunity to exercise some sort of leverage in a way that would advance the cause of Medicare for all. How's that work? Well, his argument is that she should have taken a tough negotiating position, demanding that Pelosi agree to schedule a vote on Medicare for all in the House of Representatives as a condition of supporting her re-election to the speakership. To hear some of Jimmy's most intense online supporters, you'd think that if AOC had done this, the result would be that Medicare for all would become law. You'd think that after years of being one of the highest profile champions of Medicare for all on the national stage, AOC was revealing herself as a hypocrite and a sellout at just the moment when she had a chance to make it a reality. Now, to be fair to Jimmy Dore, I don't think even he thinks that things would have played out that way. He knows it wouldn't have had the votes to pass even the House, never mind a Senate that will most likely be controlled by the GOP. His idea is this. There are currently well over 100 congressional co-sponsors of the Medicare for All bill. At least some of these people probably aren't serious about it. They're co-sponsoring to shore up their progressive credentials, but push came to shove, they wouldn't actually vote for it. So he thinks that having a vote would be a useful test. We'd see who was really supporting giving health care to their desperate constituents and who would ultimately side with the insurance industry. Once the battle lines were drawn, we'd know who to target. His premise is almost certainly right in some cases. I'm sure there are at least some congressional Democrats who are ready to make the gesture of symbolically supporting an important reform, but would think twice about enraging the donor class. But his idea for finding out who these people are collapses the second we start to think about it. Let's assume for the sake of argument that AOC has enough leverage to force Pelosi to allow a vote on Medicare for all. She almost certainly does not have that kind of leverage, because why would she? It's not as if Pelosi was in a close leadership race where she desperately needed the votes of a few leftists. But whatever, let's pretend she did. When that vote happened, why would anyone who was co-sponsoring it vote against it? Assuming that these insincere co-sponsors can do basic arithmetic, they know it was perfectly safe to vote for it, because if literally every single co-sponsor voted for it, and they somehow conjured up another 100 votes out of thin air, it would still be defeated in the House. And that's not even mentioning the existence of the Senate, or a president-elect who openly said on the campaign trail that if it did somehow pass both houses, he'd veto it. So why the hell wouldn't anyone willing to symbolically co-sponsor Medicare for All, thinking it wouldn't go anywhere, also cast a symbolic vote for Medicare for All, again, knowing that it wouldn't go anywhere? This idea makes no sense. So why are so many people in Dore's audience so willing to believe it and to denounce one of the only real solid social democrats in the House over this? The underlying disease is voluntarism, the idea that we can will important political outcomes into existence. Put a different way, voluntarism is the idea that anything is possible, regardless of the political terrain we're fighting on. And if anything is always possible, then only personal motivations explain why things happen the way they happen. Voluntarists attribute failures and losses not to larger structural factors, but to the losers having not fought hard enough to win in the first place. Rather than assessing the circumstances in which actors must make tough choices, they're instead considered to be sellouts and hypocrites. Think about the kind of leftists, they exist, I've met some, who think that Evo Morales must be a sellout because the Bolivian capitalist class wasn't expropriated during his tenure as president. Never mind that cutting off one tiny developing nation from the world economy would have been a humanitarian disaster, very quickly followed by a political disaster. Now, of course, there are moments when a particular individual does have a unique amount of leverage over the course of history. If Vladimir Lenin didn't return to Petrograd in October 1917, one could reasonably argue that the Bolshevik Revolution wouldn't have happened, and the 20th century would have looked very different. Similarly, while the American president is surely constrained in many respects, he has a far greater ability to dramatically change the course of human existence through his political choices than nearly any other actor. But these examples aren't voluntarism precisely because, in both cases, the institutional and structural factors in their particular context enable greater individual impact. For a single modern congresswoman, that's just not the case. Voluntarism needs to be resisted, not primarily because it's unkind or uncharitable to the leaders castigated for allegedly not wanting good outcomes badly enough, but much more importantly because it blocks us from seeing things clearly so we can start to think about what strategy could actually lead us to victory. Maybe AOC should have refused to vote for Pelosi rather than extracting whatever tiny concessions she may have been able to get from her thoroughly lousy bargaining position. Her refusing to vote for Pelosi wouldn't have achieved anything concretely, but at least it would have been mildly ideologically clarifying for anyone who happened to be paying attention. That's not nothing, but symbolic victories alone should not be even our acceptable minimum. And whatever you think about that issue, let's get the big picture clear. The reason Medicare for All isn't going to become a reality in the next session of Congress or the one after that is not that the very few leftists in that institution don't want it badly enough. It's that the current balance of forces is extraordinarily unfavorable to the left. The American business elites have enormous wealth and enormous power, and we lack both a vibrant, militant American labor movement and political institutions like a workers' party or trade union confederations to multiply the strength of average working people. You might think that that sounds like an absurdly massive mountain to climb, but it's literally the only way anyone around the world has ever won these things in the past. In other words, the only solution is to do the long, slow, frustrating work of building a movement that can completely change the composition of Congress and organize at the base of society to overcome inevitable ruling class resistance to important reforms. There is no one neat trick that substitutes for organizing the working class and achieving power. Voluntarism is dangerous for the same reason that it's dangerous to swim in a riptide and assume that you won't drown if you just paddle hard enough. We need to be real about what's actually stopping us from achieving our goals if the serious left is ever going to be anything but a pointless sideshow.